Assalamualaikum. My name is Akmal bin Ahmad. So I will present about demand and supply. So what is demand and supply? So the law of demand and supply is a theory that explains interaction between the sellers of a resource and the buyer for that resource. So this theory defines a relationship between the price of given goods or product, that the willingness of people to either buy or sell it. So generally, as the price increases, people willing to supply more and demand less, and vice versa when the price falls. So the theory is based on two separate laws, the law of demand and the law of supply. So the two laws interact to determine the actual market price and volume good on the market. So the law of demand say that at high prices, buyer will demand less of an economic goods. But the law of supply say that at high prices, seller will supply more of an economic goods. So these two laws interact to determine the actual market prices and the volume of goods that are traded on the market. Several independent factors can affect the shape of market. Supply and demand influencing both prices quantity that we observe in the market demand. So the law of demand state that if all factors remain equal, the higher price of good, the few people will demand it in the good. So in other words, the higher price, the lower the quantity demanded. The amount of good that buyer purchase at high price is less. So this is because of goods. This is because the price of goods go up. So that's the opportunity cost of buying that good. As a result, people will naturally avoid buying the product that will force them to forget the consumption of some things that are more valuable. So the next thing is supplies. Like the law of demand, the law of supplies demonstrate the quantity sold at specific price, but unlikely the law of demand, the supply relationship show an upward slope. So where this is mean that the higher price, the higher quantity supplies from the seller perspective. So each additional unit's opportunity cost tend to be higher and higher. Producers supply more at higher price. So this is because higher selling price justifies the higher opportunity cost of each additional unit sold. So very important to both supply and demand. To understand that term, it's already mentioned on this chart. The quantity demanded or supply found along a horizontal axis is always measured in units of good over the given time interval. So that's it for me. Thank you.
So next, we move on to the issue pertaining to the disruption of demand and supply in Malaysia. The disruption of demand and supply in Malaysia can be clearly be seen during the recent pandemic of COVID-19. Sectors or institutions such as tourism, foreign exchange rates, and the values of consumer spending within the Malaysian people are being heavily affected. For instance, as we can see in tourism, the tourism demand for Malaysian tourism is decreased, with only 4.3 million tourists that came to Malaysia, which is very different with during 2019 there are 21.6 million that came to Malaysia. So, and then with the supply chain within the tourism sectors also decreased, with the cancellation of cancellation of high profile sports events such as Tour de Langkawi as a tourist attraction, which will cause the flow within the demand and supply in the tourism sectors of Malaysia. And then when we talk about foreign exchange rates, during the pandemic, Malaysian ringgits are getting weaker, with 4 ringgit 26 cents are equivalent or to be exchanged with $1 USD, which are very far if we want to compare with during 2019, where there there's only 4 ringgit point 08 cents in equivalent with $1 dollar.
Yeah.
The depreciation of Malaysian ringgit will cause the lesser demand for import goods, and Malaysian exports will be increased as the price of Malaysian ringgits or Malaysian products are relatively cheaper. And then the issues of consumer spending within the Malaysia itself, where we can see that during the pandemic, there's the consumer spending in Malaysia are decreased with approximately to 212 millions in 2019, and then it drops to approximately 165 million. Then this cumulative decrease of consumer spending in Malaysia affect the livestock production, which the livestock production also will decrease. And then but somehow there are situations where for instance during the pandemic there are a heavy demand towards bread, in which it caused the production of bread to be increased, such like Gardenia. They increase the production of their bread with 2.2 million loaves of bread to meet the 60% of the demand for their breads from across the Malaysia during the pandemic. Okay. After the pandemic, Malaysian economy is still in recoveries, but there's also a tension where there's inflation in current Malaysian economic conditions. We can clearly notice when in our closer circles, particularly in the university cafeteria, where the food price increased because the commodities to make the food, the price commodities to make the food increase, which will make the price getting higher. Thus, so as a result, the students are willing to not eat in order for them to survive and save more money for the future.
There are many reasons why the supply and demand issues have happened. One of the first reasons that I would like to mention is the pandemic. When the pandemic hit, many economic sectors in the country have ceased to function. Along with it, many Malaysians have lost their jobs as a result of it. And because of this, many Malaysians cannot simply make any money. And since they cannot make any money, it means they just cannot afford to spend, as they need that money or whatever money they have in order to survive and make ends meet. Of course, this has led to another issue with the pandemic, which is the decrease of the value of the ringgit. With the decrease of the value of the ringgit, this has resulted in many products, especially foreign products, to be far more expensive, and this will eventually cause not just a demand issue but a supply issue, as many suppliers will find it expensive to get supplies as well as products from abroad, in which Malaysia is heavily reliant upon, as Malaysia gains a lot, and I mean a lot, of its products from abroad. They are very heavily reliant on exports, which of course is another issue for why these demand and supply issues happen. Another reason, really, of course, is the over-reliance on exports. Many brands, companies, businesses in Malaysia are mainly international businesses, and because of this, it means that a lot of Malaysia's money, or rather a lot of the money made in Malaysia, doesn't come from its local populace or its local businesses, but rather from international businesses, which means that they constantly have to get supplies, resources, products from abroad, as many of them are manufactured abroad and then later exported to Malaysia. Of course, another reason is, this also ties in with the pandemic issue I mentioned earlier, the increase of price of products. Even basic necessities such as bread, rice, and even more recently chicken have recently increased in price. And the increase in price, along with the fact that many Malaysians have lost their jobs since the pandemic, as well as a closure of many economic sectors during the pandemic, has basically caused a lot of Malaysians to just cannot be able to afford these new increase in prices because, of course, with wages more or less remaining the same, it basically means they just cannot afford to spend at all. And on to the final issue I'd like to mention, which is in regards to the spending power, another reason. So what I mean is that along with the decrease in the value of the ringgit as well as the pandemic, Malaysians losing their jobs has basically caused them to just not want to spend as much because they just cannot afford to spend for many different products and leisures. And of course, due to this, it basically means that the demand will heavily decrease in Malaysia and supply will eventually continue to decrease as the prices of products will continue to increase until to the point where suppliers just cannot afford it anymore.
Hi, I'm Mumin Muhammad Shukri. My mention number is 2114605, and today I will be explaining about what Malaysia could do in order to solve the issues which have been stated before. Tourism is extremely essential to the prosperity of many economies throughout the world as it helps to generate monies, create a lot of job opportunities, strengthen the country infrastructure, and even develop a sense of cultural exchange between foreigners and locals. Overall, international tourists play a huge role in Malaysia's economy since they contributed the most to our currency exchange as well as our revenues. Previously, in 2019, we collected almost RM 86,143.50 million, but it fell down to 85.27%, which is RM 12,688.20 million in 2020. It clearly shows how critical our economy was during that particular period. In order for us to solve this tourism issue, we could not just jump into the international tourism. Instead, we should be focusing on its roots first, which is a domestic tourism. Therefore, AirAsia, a Malaysian multinational low-cost airline, has subsidized its ticket price, and they have come up with various promotions such as a 3-day promo in which its one-way fare could start from as low as RM 12 ringgit only, and the other one is called 50% discount on their returning trip. AirAsia might as well advertise it to the whole nation in order to attract and gain awareness toward their promotions. As a result, it will boost their sales of the tickets, thus increasing the number of people who will travel and eventually will solve the tourism issue in Malaysia. Moving on to the next solutions. The government will try to increase the interest rate as high as possible because it will increase the value of our country's currency as well. Higher interest rates tend to attract foreign investment, raising demand for and the value of the native currency. As foreign investors are gradually investing in Ringgit Malaysia, it will relatively lead to an increase in the demand for our currency. Apart from that, the demand for a country's goods and services, as well as economic stability, are also a significant factors in currency valuations. Thus, with the demand for our currency aggressively increasing, the government could now take this opportunity to raise our country's GDP by importing more goods and services. Having high GDP will then help to strengthen and maintain the current country's currency value. On to the last solution of the issue in Malaysia. COVID-19 has impacted almost all of us, especially in terms of financial constraints. Consumer spending, or also called household consumption, is one of the components of GDP. As the consumer spending decreases, its GDP will decrease as well. Thus, in order to overcome this issue, the government has introduced a bunch of financial incentives, specifically such as Impejana, BPR, BKM, and the latest one was E-Pemula. Furthermore, another way which could increase our country's consumer spending is by reducing the interest rate on borrowing. As the rate is low, it will encourage more people to borrow money, thus inclusively increase in their spending rather than
Considering all of the facts, it seems supply and demand have an important role or relationship because together they determine the prices and quantities of most goods and services available in a given market. According to the principle of market economy, the relationship between supply and demand balances out at a point in the future. This point at which supply is equal to demand which is called the equilibrium price. At the given equilibrium point, the market given the price for a given goods is supplied to the number of goods demanded. At this point, prices are perfectly set to interest consumers to purchase goods at the same time, ensuring that companies produce neither too much nor too little product.